Okay, everyone, welcome back to Line Your Own Pockets. Today, we are going to take a look at how we generate ideas, right? For me, this is going to be one of the hardest parts for what it is that I do. So I'm really excited to hear Dave's point of view on this. I know he's got like everything. He's got some systematized ways to generate ideas for our systematic strategies. This again, I think is going to end up being a multi-stage episode, a multi-part episode, because we're talking about how do we generate ideas, how do we record them, which ideas are going to be worthwhile, which aren't. And I think it speaks a little bit more broadly to, you could say, the state of the world where there is information and ideas everywhere. When it comes to trading, you go on Twitter, you type in trading, you'll fall into thousands of people out there spitting your ideas. So how do you generate? How do you know which ones are worthwhile? All that kind of stuff. We'll get talking about. So, how's your week been so far, Dave? Before we get into the nitty gritty.
Yeah, it's been good. Yeah, had a good week so far. Excited to. I've always looked forward to talking about trading with you. So happy to be on here.
Awesome. So, I want to get started with a couple ideas that you have on how to generate ideas, right? This is something that I do a lot by brute force, and I'll explain kind of my rationale behind it. That I think you probably have some more, I don't know, elegant ways to take a look at it. So, why don't you just start with one great idea generation source for the people out there?
Yeah, so a lot of traders come to me for my trading success roadmap offering, and so it's a custom roadmap for uh, traders. Typically, they've had a little bit of success, but they know they can do better. So I look at their process and help them improve. One of the things I always include with that is a process for coming up with new ideas. Now, when I was starting out, I had some collaborations with some other traders. This was years ago, and I was always struck at some of the ideas they would come up with. I was like, man, I would never be able to come up with that idea. How did you do it? And what I realized over time, they just have a better process. They have a process for coming up with new ideas. And so I eventually came up with my own, and this is what I recommend for traders who are, trying to come up with the ideas in the first place. Um, so at the end of the trading day, this is something that you can put in place and do every single day. And I think it's important that it becomes a daily process. Even weekly or less frequent is gonna be not as good. Like, doing something daily is gonna build over time, and it's gonna be better for you. You're not gonna have great ideas every day, but you need to put yourself in a position to notice the unusual things that can turn into a strategy. So, what I tell people is, at the end of the trading day, have a scan where you can go and look at the stocks that went up the most that day, the stocks that went down the most that day, and then the stocks that had the biggest range that day compared to what they normally do.
Yeah.
Those trades or those stocks are going to be the ones that you're going to want to participate in and capture some of those moves somehow. So look at, do a chart review for those from those scans every day and just go through a simple exercise where pretend that your life depended on capturing that move somehow. How would you have done it? How, go back and look at the chart before the move happened. How would you have captured that? And like I said, this process, uh, you're not going to come up with a great idea every day,
No. Yeah.
but
Certainly not.
it becomes cumulative, and you'll notice that you want to put yourself in a position where you're noticing routinely. And the more you do that, the more you're going to be able to identify unusual things as a pattern that you can create a strategy from. So that is a process that I do and that I recommend to people that they do. Do you have a similar sort of process that you go through?
Mine's gonna be a little different, but, this is actually the first thing I thought about, which is funny, and for people joining the podcast a little bit later, again, Dave's exclusively, a day trader. I have some systems I'm working on from a day trading point of view, but I'm more of the longer term swing trade investment time frame. And, William O'Neill, How to Make Money in Stocks. Have you ever read that one? That's a classic trading book.
Yeah,
He did
many
the
years ago. Yeah,
he did the same. That was his exercise, right? When he talks about in the beginning, he's like, if William O'Neill, for those who don't know, Investors Business Daily, invented the cup and handle, the can slim method, a legendary investor and trader of our time. And that's how he got started. He did the same thing. He would go back and look at what the best movers, the 10 baggers, the stocks that went up 10x over a period of months or years. He would look at what they looked at like when they just got started, look at the fundamentals when they just got started, look at all this when they just got started. And that's how he was able to build his whole can slip method, because he would look at, Home Depot, I think, was a prime example of his. Like, what did Home Depot look at before it had its meteoric rise? And he noticed, things in the fundamentals, and he noticed things in the technicals. And then it was just an exercise of, now that I've discovered what this thing, all of these great winners had in common, I just need to go find more of those. So it's just kind of uh, funny, but it's just cool to see that it's the same type of methodology, even though it's, he obviously wasn't a systems trader. He developed a system, I guess, that he utilized, but he wasn't kind of fully quantitative, and then obviously not a day trader. But I love when I see things apply across styles and time frames.
yeah. And if you didn't know that about him, you would think that he was just born with the ability to come up with strategy, right?
Yeah, it's
Strategy,
like some
right?
kind of genius or something. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
but
no,
that's not nobody's like that.
yeah.
That's a myth. Like there's nobody that just is comes out of the womb with the ability to create strategies.
Yeah, so the second you said, right, find the stuff that did the best and figure out how you'd get in them, I just thought immediately to that book and that style. And that is part of it. I like to go back, I like to look back at different setups and trades, and apply different indicator sets to them, and do that as well. I'm one that I really like to dive into content. I make a lot of content, but I also consume a lot of content. So, one of the things that I feel really lucky to have done is to meet a lot of traders in person. So I know, very easily I can pull out the good from the bad, and my relationship with the CMT, I think, also gives me that as well. So one thing I do, one process now I have, for example, is the CMT has what they call the Dow Awards, where every year everyone applies papers on, something that they've noticed in the market, some sort of correlational aspect or volatility-based position sizing, and blah blah. And a lot of the people look at this and say it's boring, but one of the quests that I'm on currently is I've downloaded all of them since the creation of the Dow Awards, and free time I sit and I read those. And like you mentioned, most of them I won't really apply. I'm not really interested in, but every now and then you read something, you go, okay, that's interesting. That's something that I can either apply to an existing strategy or look to apply to a new strategy. So I'm more of as opposed to a market consumer, I'm more of a content consumer, or I'll find people on YouTube or Twitter or something that, I have some faith that what they're saying is legitimate, and I will consume that content as well. And then the beauty of it, which again we'll talk about in future episodes, is you can then test, right? If someone comes up and says, I found the magic wing bang system that's going to make you so much money, you
Yeah.
go, okay, well, now let's go verify. So that's mostly how I do it. I just like to consume, I just find I'm a consumer of content, so then I end up kind of gravitating to that style.
Yeah, I think collaborations with other traders are good. I mean, I'm sure we'll do a podcast episode on that one day in the future. Um, but yeah, you're right. You get good ideas from lots of different places, and it's good to have a process for doing that and do it religiously. Um, I think of an analogy. It's sort of like, imagine a dirty tap, like a spigot that hasn't been running a while, like a long time.
Mhm.
You turn that spigot on, the first water that's going to come out is going to be brown and nasty.
Yeah.
But over time, it's simply going to come. going to become clearer and clearer and clearer, and soon you got really clean water coming out of there. That's how I think about this process for people. It's it's not gonna be great at the beginning, but over time, you're gonna get better and better at doing it, and it's that water's gonna and the ideas are gonna become cleaner and cleaner.
Yeah, and that's, it's funny. I have two young kids. I've got a 4-month-old and a 2-year old. And sometimes I just find myself thinking, I'm like, well, if my son came to me now, does obviously doesn't have to at 2 years old, and said, well, what is going to be kind of the most important or one of the most important skills for him to master? I think it's going to be not the knowledge of things, because we, as a human race, we kind of got that conquered. It is the parsing of what's important in knowledge of things. And I think when it comes to idea generation, that's super important as well. Is that you go to YouTube right now and just type in trading systems, and there'll just be millions of them come up. And some of them, pretty commonsensically, you can get rid of, right? Anything that says 99% win rate, or right, double your money every month, or you can parse those out. But there are some people and there's some content out there which can do a pretty good job of fooling you that it's good content or bad content. So being able to parse through that, I think, is important. Same with your methodology, Dave, where you're looking at the biggest winners and losers each day. Part of the issue that can come from that is just being able to say, A, is whatever happened achievable? And B, am I just making shapes of clouds, right? I think that's a common thing that the human brain needs to kind of force out, is that the ability to fool yourself and, oh, I definitely would have saw that thing before it happened. And then one question that I wanted to ask based off your method is that, okay, so if I notice every day that the biggest winner starts with some sort of opening range break, right? Because I'm looking at the biggest winners and biggest losers, I guess I'm just by kind of naturally, I'm filtering out all the ones that had an opening range break and didn't work. So is that something that you flush out later in testing, or is that something that you address during idea generation?
Sure. So this is at the very first stage of coming up with a strategy, and what you're gonna find, these are not gonna be fully flushed out ideas. These are just gonna be um, the beginnings, the starting points you use to come up with a strategy, do some back testing, go through the process of getting that to a form where it's tradable. But to even start getting to that point, you have to have a good starting point. So um, there's going to be a lot of trial and error. There's going to be some bad ideas that you come up with, but even the bad ideas you come up with are valuable in that they're BS, right? And you
Hmm.
can avoid that in the future. So um, yeah, it's an important thing to be able to do.
That was the Thomas Edison quote, that, I every time he did something wrong, it wasn't that something happened wrong. He's just eliminated a wrong thing that he
Yeah.
can then mark off his list, which I think is very common. It's very easy to kind of gravitate to trying to uh, trying to look at something, and especially the way in the human brain will look at a thing and say, oh, that occurred 3 times and I can see it happen 3 times in a row, therefore it's a good idea. But like you mentioned, that over time, what we end up learning is that, okay, right, this thing actually isn't what I want it to be at all. uh, and I wouldn't know that unless I went and did the testing. But often, sometimes you can find things that maybe when you're testing a strategy, the strategy ended up not working, but there was one interesting fact in the strategy. There was an indicator that, as you were wiggling that indicator, did seem to have some effect on what was a bad strategy. Then you can take that one little indicator and you can maybe apply it to some other things you do or some things you do in the future, which one thing that I really, really like. And even if people aren't going to be auto traders, one of the reasons that I suggest this kind of idea generation and the testing of ideas that you see around is, yeah, the I believe it dramatically accelerates learning, right? Me and Dave were talking before I went on here. I had a question that I was asking of one of my systems last night, and I ran, again, like 2 million trades through, and it answered a pretty interesting question that I had just completely taken for granted. And then that opens up another door in my brain that makes me want to explore down with different other trading strategies that maybe I made the same assumption on. So I think being open to that kind of stuff is best. And I see this a lot in traders, and I'm going to be interested to see your feedback on this, Dave, that traders seem to get kind of stuck in their ways quite often. It's like it's so hard to achieve any form of profitability that once they get there, they just seem to stop. They won't change their platform, they won't change anything about it. So, if someone's listening and they're like that, and they're like, listen, I'm making a few bucks and everything's fine. How do you encourage someone like that to continue to get new ideas coming in?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because that is really the most important part of being successful for the long term is being able to come up with new ideas. And because I've experienced this myself, the first strategy I traded worked great for 3 or 4 years, actually probably more than that. And all of a sudden I was in a drawdown and I knew that, gosh, I wish I had some other ideas to fall back on. So this is the process that I wanted to have in place at that point. And if you have something successful now, it's so easy to sort of rest on your laurels
Yep.
and just go with it. But you constantly have to be coming up with new ideas because you don't know when you're going to need to have those new ideas. And if your strategy stops working, you're going to be at a dead end and it's going to suck.
And I'll go one step further than that. I personally believe, and the more I'm getting into this world, right, the more I'm getting into kind of the systematic side of things, and the more I'm trading different styles and different assets, right. So like we mentioned, Dave's more on the day trading side of things, and I'm exploring to get back into that world, but I'm doing some swing trading, revision to the mean, pullbacks, a lot of different strategies, and I'm trading forex at the same time I'm trading stocks. And even if you're doing one thing that's working well, what I've noticed is that the more I'm able to bring into my world when it comes to different strategies, different instruments, different time frames, different styles, is there always seems to be something that's working. So, even if you're someone who's going to focus exclusively on day trading, I think bringing in more and more ideas and more styles will just smooth out returns, right? So, even if you're someone who's doing very well trading, a certain gap strategy and it works and everything is fantastic, we know that there'll be periods of time, even if it doesn't degrade permanently, like Dave was talking about, even if it just degrades when you're outside of a high volatility season in the market changes its characteristic in some way and becomes incredibly boring, and that makes less money. Well, if you had taken that time when things were good to develop a strategy that worked well when the market was boring, you've just kind of smoothed out your returns. And that's the way I look at it, is that the more strategies that you can kind of combine and the more ideas you can get, it may not amplify returns, but it smooths drawdown and it smooths out returns. For me, this is one of the hardest parts, and I wanted your feedback on this. Am I right to say that this is probably the most time-consuming endeavor um, of strategy development? Because once you have a strategy and that strategy is testing okay, and you're trading it and it's working okay, that doesn't create a lot of work. And the problem I think a lot of people have is the whole too good to be true aspect of systems trading. They're like, well, I just, if I just, for me, once a week, I just set out all my swing orders and I walk away. Does that mean I go to the golf course and, I don't have to do anything else? And I think the gotcha there that most people don't explore is that one of the largest parts for me anyway, if I were to do like a pie chart of my time, one of the largest parts of my time is that trying to figure out that idea generation side of things. When would you notice that that's a big part for you, or the way you systemize it, does it make it less?
I think as a beginning trader, you're going to need to spend more time in that area coming up with new ideas. And then once you get something that's working, that's where you're going to be focusing. And we could probably do a whole other episode on this. Like what I'm thinking about now in this process is coming up with new ideas that you're not trading. The more lucrative thing actually is going to be once you get something that is working, improving that and focusing on that. Like there's a whole bunch of different ways to improve something that is working. And I think of that as different from what we're talking about here is just coming up with new ideas. You get that the new idea generation stuff, you can get that process going, kind of put that in um, on cruise control and have that running behind the scenes sort of all the time.
Hmm.
And but I think once you get something that works, you're going to spend most of your time with that thing and improving the strategy and idea that you've come up with that does have legs.
And that for sure, I think, is going to be an exciting, probably series of episodes on uh, the tweaking of things, right? Because it's one of those, it's very fine line. It's a very interesting tightrope on, tweaking things too much or doing things in a way that end up hurting returns over time and all of that. But I would still kind of classify a lot of that in idea generation because, like we mentioned, the question that I asked this one system last night, that the my notepad that I was scribbling all through last night is saying, okay, well, this is a new idea that is then opened up. Now I need to look at all my other strategies and say, am I making an assumption with this one indicator set that I did in this strategy, which the testing told me I was wrong. I was looking shorter term. I should have been looking longer term. So now I have it on my screen, actually right there, just a sticky note that says, hey, I want you to take every strategy that you've made that assumption on and go back and retool it with what this new strategy has taught you, and then kind of go from there. So um, I think you're right in basically saying that when you get to a point where you've been doing this long enough, one pathway will open up another pathway, which will open up another pathway. It just seems to be a series of doors that, okay, now that I've opened up this door, that answered a question, which was good. It improved the system I was looking to improve, but now it also created another couple nights of work, retooling other systems down the way.
For sure, yeah. And you know, when you think about this whole process that you have to put in place, pretty daunting, right? It's a lot of work. You're doing something every day. Um, and you're not going to get a payoff from it every day. The
Hmm.
payoff is going to be in bunches over time. It's not going to be a linear curve of improvement. So that's hard for people. The improvements are going to be you're going to flatline for a while, and then all of a sudden you're going to have sort of a breakthrough. You don't know when that's coming. Could be next week, could be next year, could be 5 years from now. But it will come if you have a good, solid process and you think about it and you are improving that process routinely.
I think a good analogy, again, my brain just exclusively thinks in analogies, but I think a good analogy for that is any sort of gym going or exercise type endeavor, right? If you're working on your bench press and you're plateaued at a certain place and you want to up your bench press a little bit, you're right. You're going to keep kind of banging your head against the wall. Eventually, if you end up doing the right things and you're working on your form and everything outside of it that ends up just being a daily grind, then eventually, right, you'll break through that plateau, but it won't be every day. Every time you go to the gym, you won't be able to add 5 pounds to your bench. You may have to go back some days. You may need to work on, some areas that you're struggling with. And this would be the same if you're, jujitsu or swimming or running or whatever it is that, yeah, it's not always linear. But just like an equity curve, right? You hope it's pointing in the right direction, even though it kind of won't be going that way every day.
Yeah, you have to take a long-term approach with this. It reminds me of you mentioned running. Of course, you know I'm a runner.
Yeah.
When I first started running, I had this loop that I would run from my house. I was probably I was in middle school, not running competitively at all. But I would go to this loop, and I would do it every day, and I would time myself, and I would get a little faster every day. And like, man, this is great. This is fun. And then, of course, one day I was way off my fastest time. I was like, man, this sucks.
Mhm.
But of course, you realize you have to take a long term approach. It's unreasonable to expect improvement every single time you go out. That's just not reasonable. And that's not how the world works. But to have a process for improvement that you know in 1 year, 5 years from now, you're going to be better. That's the process you want to put in place.
Well, and sticking on that example, I think the diminishing returns can is something that people need to understand too, right? So just to use the running example, say you were getting 5 seconds faster every day for a period of time. Well, if you extrapolate that out in the long run, then you're essentially not taking any time to run the race, right? So the increment in which you need to measure yourself has to change, right? So maybe your initial goal was to get 1 minute faster around that loop. Well, once you're that fast, well, now your goal should be to get 10 seconds faster around that loop and then 5 seconds. And then when I used to swim competitively, I remember, the difference between the winner and the loser was sometimes a tenth of a second, right? So it was always, you're always pushing to a goal, but you need to know that your goal is always decreasing, right? So if I have a strategy right now that yields 30% a year, well, I would love to if it ever got to 300% a year, that'd be fantastic. But the goals then change to say, okay, well, can I generate a little bit more return and can I do a little bit less drawdown and can I do it's no longer going from 0 to 30 and then 30 to 60 and then all the way to 3 million% return. I'm posing outside of my Lambo on my YouTube video that I rented. It's the increment in which you have to measure yourself also has to change, right? So as you're kind of going down that road, you need to say, okay, well, I'm generating new ideas, but it might not be to double my return again. It might be to lower my drawdown or increase consistency or do that or the other thing. So as you get better and as you get more consistent, that goal will kind of shift as well, right?
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, again, I love how we always start with like a small topic, and in my head, I'm like, are we going to be able to cover time in it? But it ends up always being super fun and super cool. So I always look forward to these. And we're not done with the idea generation topic. We got a whole other slew of things that we're going to go down this road of. So, make sure you're staying tuned wherever you stay tuned at. And do you have anything to leave the kids with there, Dave?
Yeah, I think that's a good place to drop off. We'll see you next week.
All right. See you next week.